Anyway, it is my very great pleasure to speak to you this evening and to bring to you this short talk around the area of health and well-being. So I suppose I'll give you just another little quick bit of background other than what Ger has said to you. That's a picture of me taken recently in Hong Kong, which is a really exciting trip that I took with my husband in the last month. And you know what? That did an awful lot for my well-being. And so I chose the themes of health and luck there. And you know something, when it comes to health, sometimes there is that element of luck, and sometimes we make our own luck. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So as Ger explained, I am a lifelong learner, and really taking it to extremes now at this stage with the PhD. But anyway, that's another day's work. And another role of which I'm inordinately proud and which really makes my happiness every day is that of a grandmother. And I'll tell you another little bit about that later too. Looking back on the series of lectures, and I don't know how many of you have attended the previous lectures in this series, but you will definitely enjoy them if you catch up with them online. I'm an empty nester, definitely. Yes. Great advice there from Orla, but you know what? I'm happy enough. I'm also an ageing woman, so you know when you look there at the presentation on ageing, there's some really interesting facts and tips there as well, and looking at the perspective then of the young people and the challenges for young people presented by Kim and Karen. There's some really interesting findings there, even for somebody in the grandparenting role if you're not in the parenting role at the moment. And above all, I guess I'm an optimist, and some of the things that we're going to talk about this evening, it's important that we're positive in looking at health and looking at well-being and looking at the story here in Ireland, because it's not without its challenges. Healthcare is not without its challenges. Our health system is not without its challenges. And as a society, we're not without our challenges. And we'll just touch a little bit on that as we go through too. So, why would I care? I'm looking down the barrel of the old 50. Why do I care so much about health promotion? Why do I care so much about the future of our health system? Well, because hopefully I'm going to be one of these with the 100-year life. I don't know. But definitely, see these two little guys here? That's my granddaughter on the left, and that's my grandson on the right. All set for St. Patrick's Day. And if we're to believe the longevity studies and the writings that are out there around longevity at the moment about the future of our young people, it is highly likely that these guys and their generation, the children in their generation, are going to live to be 108 years old. So to kind of put that in context, I was thinking about this today. If I live to be 108, and I want to up the old game on the health and fitness if I do, but if I was to live to be 108, these guys would be 60. So our population is ageing, and we are ageing fast. We are thankfully going to live long and hopefully healthy lives. But we need to think about that, and we need to think about it very seriously, and we need to think about it differently than any generation who has gone before us. And we need to think about it particularly closely for the generations that come behind us. So, what are we going to look at tonight? Well, very briefly, we're going to look at a little bit of background around health and health promotion. We're going to look a little bit at some of the findings from the Healthy Ireland study, because I find it's always interesting, and there are lots and lots of international studies, but it's interesting to get the facts and figures, around our own health and well-being as a nation. We're going to talk a little bit about physical health and mental health, and within the physical health factors that we're looking at, we're going to interweave the mental health. Gone are the days where we think about physical health over here and mental health over there. They are interwoven in our lives. We have one body, we have one mind. So we have physical health and we have mental health, and they affect each other and they interact. Day to day, our physical health affects our mental health and vice versa. We're going to look at a little bit around the notion of well-being and salutogenesis, and then we'll just talk a little bit about balance. So, probably everybody is pretty familiar with the WHO definition of what health is. And essentially, the most important part is that it's not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And we'll come back to that recurring theme as we go through. So, when we're talking about promoting health, and you won't be able to read those, I'm sure, from where you are, but there are so many elements. And essentially, when we think about health promotion, it's very important to remember that we always traditionally came from the idea of individual behaviour and how important that was for health. And it is important. However, there are very, very significant social determinants of health. And those social determinants, that can be around a person's education, around their background, around their social setting, around disadvantage, and we can be in a privileged society, and many of us are very privileged in society. We can forget sometimes, and it's easy to almost blame people for the fact that they are maybe on low incomes and smoking and taking alcohol and maybe having a poor diet. It's sometimes easier to blame people than to look at what are we doing in society to improve those circumstances for people, to improve their education, to improve their circumstances, so that we lift people out of those circumstances and we improve the health of all our nation. And if we do that, we improve society for everyone. And I was drawn to think about the homeless crisis when I was talking about this and thinking about health and thinking about the number of children in our country who are growing up in hotel rooms. And when I look back and I think of those, my 2 grandchildren there, and I think of, all of our children, all of our grandchildren, how would it affect them to be growing up in a hotel room? And I just think, and this is my only real call to action in here, because when we look at health and well-being for ourselves, that's a personal decision. But my call to action from this evening is to say, we have local elections coming up. Let's open up the conversation with our political representatives and say, what are your thinking? What's your thinking on health? What's your thinking on homelessness? And that we choose wisely who we entrust our futures to. It's not only about national politics, it's right down to local level now when it comes to the difficulties in society. However, this is not a political rally. So, on that note, we'll move on and we'll look and say, well, what are the 3 pillars of health promotion? And they are that good governance. So that's whether that's within our own health system or whether that's within the good governance of the country. And we're very good in Ireland, in fairness, at drawing up very good documents to say, well, this is how we should really do things. I mean, if you think in the world of mental health, you think of a vision for change, a very, very, literally it's in the title, a visionary document. At the same time, many, many years on, 13 years on now, it's still not fully implemented. We have the Healthy Ireland framework, and again, a very aspirational document, and a lot of work has been done, and a lot of good work has been done in physical health and in mental health in Ireland, and that's good, and we should applaud ourselves for that, but still get on with the work of making things better. We really, really need to look as a society and say, what are the things in our country that are not working, and how can we fix them? How can we come together to fix them, to build a better society for all of us and for our future generations? So, the Healthy Ireland framework. So, it's built on these pillars of increasing the proportion of people who are healthy at all stages of life, and we all want that. Reducing health inequalities, which I have already addressed. Protecting the public from threats to health and well-being, which of course is very important. And creating an environment where every individual and sector of society can play their part in achieving a healthy Ireland. Again, that speaks to our sense of community. And so, we look at being tobacco-free. Okay? Not an easy challenge, certainly not an easy challenge in the sphere of mental health, and it's something that we need to examine closely, and it's something that we need to work on collaboratively with our service users, that we get to the point where we are educated and we know and we understand the important choice of stopping smoking. We need to look at the healthy childhood, as we've mentioned, and as has been explored in the previous conversations in this series. We need to look at healthy eating and active living. We need to look at mental health and well-being and how they relate in the physical health sphere. We have looked at positive ageing, and again, a very important element, and it's something we'll touch on later in the talk. And then we need to look at the alcohol consumption. Again, another, difficult area in Irish society. So why would we look at it? Well, if you look at the stats there, we can see, and cancer is obviously a very high proportion of the deaths there. But what is sadly also a very, very high proportion of deaths there, and this is for 2016, is by accident, suicide, homicide and undetermined. So there are a lot of preventable deaths. There are a lot of preventable deaths in the heart and the lung health as well. And so these are important areas that we look at and we consider. When we talk about health, we talk about cardiovascular health, we talk about respiratory health, we talk about mental health and suicide prevention, and we talk about cancer prevention. So, the findings of the survey that underpins the Healthy Ireland framework, the findings in general have, they vary. We have 66% of people are getting their blood pressure taken. They're monitoring their blood pressure. We have 25% of people taking up the flu vaccine. We have 85. We have the prevalence there across the board of the various health conditions. So we are monitoring our health status. But I suppose what we need to do is to get more active in our flu vaccine promotion, to get more active in promoting blood pressure monitoring for people. And when we are monitoring the blood pressure, we talk then too about monitoring for the lipid levels and so on, with cholesterol and so on. So all these general checkups that you can get with your GP are very, very important. Our diet and nutrition. Again, and this, for me, personal challenge for me, our consumption of unhealthy foods. We have a high consumption of unhealthy foods, a high consumption of sugar-sweetened drinks, and a high consumption. Our consumption of fruit and vegetables could certainly be better. It's in the low 30% there. So it's quite poor from the Healthy Ireland survey. So again, programmes in our schools, programmes in our workplace that encourage the consumption of healthy food and healthy diets are so important for us. And when we think at home about, well, what would I like to do to improve my health? Moving on to the seven fruit and veg portions per day, and it used to be your 5 a day. Now it's your 7 a day, and balancing that with more veg and less fruit as well is an important one as well. These are small changes that we can make, and they're important. So, our alcohol. There's a high prevalence of alcohol intake, as we know in Ireland. Binge drinking is, it's a huge problem. We tend to think that binge drinking is a big problem in our young population, and indeed it is. You see the figure there is 35%, and I'm sorry if that's not that visible on the screen. But if you look at, say, my own age group, 45 to 56 age group, 17% of people reported in the survey to engage in binge drinking. You really actually wouldn't think that figure would be that high, that it's almost 1 in 5 people. So we really need to think about our consumption of alcohol, and I feel that definitely if our regular TV programmes, it's constantly coming at us. It's the glass of wine after work. It's it's endemic in all of the advertising. So we need to think carefully about that and say, is this something that I want, or is this just a habit? Is this, am I celebrating a special occasion, or is this just a wet Monday? So I suppose these are important things to think about. And one of the findings from this survey was that 15% of people, I'm sorry, I just can't read that at the moment. Yeah, so they had feelings of guilt or remorse directly related to their alcohol intake. So that's really, it's not good. Something that should be a pleasurable activity, should be something enjoyable, that we're having feelings of guilt and remorse. Our oral health, again, all of these aspects of health, we're in the mid-ranges. Our performance is okay in Ireland, but we could definitely improve. And our dental visits, and again this comes back to encouraging family members, maybe older family members, to be careful with the dental hygiene and to make sure to do the dental visits, because the big thing with the dental visits is that we will spot the oral cancers. And the oral cancers are so common particularly among smokers. Cancers of the mouth, cancer of the gums, cancer of the jaw, and they will be spotted in routine dental checkups very often. And we come to our perennial problem, the smoking. And while our smoking rate has lowered, and there are more people in Ireland now who have quit smoking than who smoke, which is great, but it is a very significant issue for our health, and it spans all realms of health. And it can be a difficulty, for people with mental health difficulties, and they perhaps have a limited income. And the cost of cigarettes, and I'm not against the fact that cigarettes are costly, but it can have a very, very significant impact on people with limited income. And so we need to work very hard to support people to stop smoking, so that whatever benefit or whatever financial income they have, that they can benefit from it rather than spending it on cigarettes. And then we come to sexual health, and we do have a national sexual health strategy, but what we have in Ireland sometimes is a huge reluctance to talk about sexual health. We have a difficulty or an embarrassment, or, oh gosh, I don't know, I wouldn't like to talk to the GP about that because I meet him over at the golf club or whatever. It can be a very, very difficult topic, but it is an important topic. And as we age, our sexual health can change. We can face challenges. There's a whole new generation of people who are out there dating, maybe for the second time around, maybe haven't been out on a date for 30 or 40 years, but are now newly single and they're out dating. And we need to inform ourselves. We need to have information around sexual health. And for people experiencing mental health difficulties, negotiating sexual relationships can be difficult, and negotiating issues around medication and the effects of medication can be difficult, and it can be embarrassing to ask. So again, we need to think, and where we feel comfortable to do so, open up these conversations among our friends, even with family members if you're comfortable to do that. And I've been a parent. I remember those difficult and embarrassing conversations with teenagers. They weren't feeling difficult or embarrassed. The embarrassment sat with me, and that's a generational thing, I think. But it is important that we talk to both our young people, but also to our partners. To maybe somebody has a new partner. It's important to talk about it and to feel comfortable and to say that there's nothing embarrassing about looking after your sexual health. And in actual fact, if you don't, you can go down the route of some quite embarrassing situations where you have to have problems dealt with. So, my thing to say to people is face that embarrassment and say, okay, this is uncomfortable, but you will find, if you talk to the right person who's listening to you, but whether that's the GP or the nurse in the GP practice or whomever, a well-woman centre perhaps, you will find that people are very understanding and, can give some really good advice. So, when we look at the subject of mental health, and I could talk for the night on the subject of mental health, the big thing that has come about in mental health in recent years is that we have opened up the conversation. And nights like tonight that are put on by the hospital over the last number of years help with that. The activity of mental health first aid is really getting the message out there, and that actual concept of mental health first aid, putting that on a par with physical first aid, to say sometimes somebody needs a little bit of help just there and then, and are you able to give that to them? It's hugely, hugely important. And the work that Sea Change have done in the last number of years has been fantastic in the area of mental health stigma and discrimination, and lifting that stigma and discrimination for people, because it was back in 2007 they did some research and it showed that 6 in 10 people would not want anybody to know that they had a mental health problem, whereas now 4 in 10 say that they wouldn't want people to know they had a mental health problem. So it's still an issue, and it's still something we need to deal with. It's still something we need to talk about in society, and it's something where we need to open up that conversation. But it is improving. And I think it's important in tonight's talk that we talk about the things that are improving. You know, our smoking cessation is improving. Our education around alcohol with Drink Aware and so on is improving. Our education around diabetes prevention, there's lots of good work done there by Diabetes Ireland and the Irish Heart Foundation around diabetes prevention but cardiovascular health. We are doing some really, really good work. And I suppose what I would implore you is to look at those. If there's an issue that affects you in your life, perhaps potentially affects you or potentially affects your loved ones, you know, have a look at the information that's there. Ask for information, ask for help, because there really is a lot of good information, good support available. So what is well-being? Well, well-being, it can be a difficult thing to determine. We can look at well-being as, you know, if someone were to say to you, what's well-being? Would you be inclined to say the absence of illness? Would people think that? Or would you think that it's something a bit deeper than that? It's something a bit more than that? So, when we talk about well-being, we're talking a little bit about physical, a little bit about interpersonal, a little bit about emotional. We're talking about moving away from the idea of illness and pathogenesis and the idea, this notion of, you know, a medical model and a medical way of judging our health. And we're getting more into the sphere of how we are in the world, our happiness, you know. And when you think about it, there are many people that we know who have very serious health complications. That could be COPD, that could be, you know, coronary heart disease, you could have people living with disabilities, and they live a very, very happy life, and they have well-being. So it's not just about illness, it's about more than that, and it's about how we engage in the world and how we feel in ourselves. So, you'll be glad to hear I'm not going to go through all the theories of salutogenesis that are highlighted there on the board, but I will pick out one or two. Viktor Frankl, who wrote the meaning of, what did Viktor Frankl write? Man's Search for Meaning. That would be it. And he talked about in the introduction that if you have a why to live, you can bear almost any how. So we can put up with an awful lot. And Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor. He survived Auschwitz and he went on to live into his 90s. And he said that if you have meaning in life, so if you have something to live for, you can bear almost anything. Emily Werner, she did a study in Hawaii, and in that study she looked at a population of people where there was high levels of alcoholism, child abuse. There was very negative, very chaotic lives going on for people. And she studied the children. And as the children came on, 70% of those children had a lot of problems. They grew up with a lot of problems and a lot of difficulties because of the chaos that was in their lives. But 30% of them did really, really well. And she looked to see why this was. And the common factor among those children is that they had a significant relationship with a reliable adult. So I want you just to remember that, because we're going to come back to that in a little while. They had a significant relationship with, a reliable adult, a stable adult. And they had community support. And they were two hugely important things. And when we look at Holocaust survivors, there have been studies again that show approximately 30% did well. Many people, 70% of the people who went through the Holocaust and who survived it, didn't survive it well, but 30% did well. They flourished. And again, some of the reason why was their relationships. They had something to live for. They had a why. They had a reason to live. So when we look at well-being, we look at our own sense of responsibility for our well-being. We look at just taking the time to breathe, taking the time just to embrace the senses, to smell and to taste and to hear and to see. We look at our eating and perhaps eating mindfully rather than on the rush and on the go, which I know I'm guilty of on a regular basis. We look at moving, getting active. We look at feeling. Those feelings and thoughts and emotions contribute to our well-being, and our thinking, and taking time to think. Our playing and our working are important. Our communication. Intimacy, again, back to the relationships and the importance of that. And finding meaning. So back to Viktor Frankl, back to that finding meaning in life and finding a purpose. And then transcending all of those things. So, we need to have a whole picture, a holistic approach, as it were. So, Brother David Steindl-Rast, this man is very, very interesting. You'll find YouTube talks and there's different pieces online about this man. And he is a brother of the Catholic faith, and he did some work with the Buddhist, looking at the Buddhist religion, and he had to get a special dispensation for that work that he did. And he had some really interesting findings, and I'm just going to, within the time this evening, just going to look quickly at this element. That noticing the gifts that we already have in our lives, taking few of our privileges for granted, seeing opportunities in challenges, and embracing the gratefulness of life are some of the domains of the moment-to-moment practice of gratefulness. So he talks a lot about gratefulness. And he says that when we are grateful, that we get joy and we get well-being. And that sometimes what he describes as how we are grateful or how we become grateful is for one moment. We just think of the moment that we are in and the opportunity that is in that moment, and how grateful we are for those opportunities. And he said for gratefulness, you need two things. So you need a gift, and he describes the gift as the gift of the moment, but he also describes that the gift has to be freely given. So this is not something that you bought or something that you earned, but this is something that is given to you, like the moments in life. And he uses a great example, and he says, if you gave a gift to a child, you bought a gift for a child, and you gave them the gift, and they ran off and they played with it and danced about and were delighted and were playing with the toy, you think, oh, she was really grateful. She really enjoyed that gift. I'm so glad I bought that. She was really grateful for it. However, if you came into the room and you had taken time to buy this lovely gift and you gave it to the child and she said thank you politely and put it away and went about her business playing with her other toys, you kind of think, well, she's got good manners. But there was no joy in that for her. There was no grateful element. And he describes that we should look to be grateful for the gifts that are given to us in life, the day-to-day opportunities, the moments that are given to us. And he talks very, very well about the fact that sometimes things are given to us for which we're not grateful. And that could be disease, it could be exploitation, it could be bullying, it could be, there are lots and lots of negative things that happen in our lives for which we wouldn't be grateful. And he says to look for the opportunity in those, because sometimes if something negative in our lives happens, that we can get in there into a small opportunity. There's an opportunity for growth. Maybe there's an opportunity to, agitate for improvement. Maybe there's an opportunity to develop. Maybe there's an opportunity to, change things, to challenge things in the more difficult gifts that are given to us. And it's very interesting, you can look, as I say, you'll find lots online about Brother David, and he has a really interesting philosophy, I think. Another lady, and I tripped across this lady's work in looking at the work of Brother David, because there are conversations between them, and she talks about the toxic myths of scarcity, and that's Lynn Twist. And she talks about something that is so relevant, I think, now for all of us, from the young people through to, our middle-aged and older people, that we have this myth in our culture now of scarcity. The first myth being there's not enough. We haven't got enough time, we haven't got enough money, we haven't got enough handbags, we haven't got enough protein, we haven't got enough. We're all the time grasping to get more. We need more of things. This notion is perpetuated in our society that we need more. We haven't got enough likes, we haven't got enough followers. We're all the time looking for more, or there's a tendency that we're always looking for more. And then the second myth ties into that very neatly, to say more is better. We need more. We need more money. We need more time. We need more energy. We need more sex. We need more relationships. We need more clothes. We need more of everything. And is that true? Is this really us? Or is this something that's been perpetuated? Is this a kind of a media thing? Is this, is there some reason why it suits in a commercial world for us to feel that we need more? Are we driven by this commercialism, this consumerism? And the third myth that Lynn talks about is that that's just the way it is. So that we kind of accept it, we kind of say, well, that's just how life is. We don't have enough time, and we don't have enough energy, and we don't have enough anything. And there's this idea too that there's a scarcity of resources, and so we need to be sure that we get enough for us and ours. It kind of creates that us and them mentality. It's like we need to grasp everything and we need to hold everything, because otherwise somebody else will get it and we will be left lacking. So there's an interesting thought there. So tonight, I suppose, I wanted to talk to you really about the well-being piece. We know a lot about physical health and we know a lot about mental health, and we work to the best of our ability to, have good physical health and to have good mental health. But I suppose the well-being piece is something that we can always improve upon, because on the spectrum that we talked about, or on that wellness continuum, we dip up and down at different times. And it's really interesting to find that there has been a study done about what makes people happy. And this study is possibly the longest study, longitudinal study ever done anywhere. And it was done in Harvard University in the US, and it's now over 80 years old, this study. And it began, and the people who remain in this study are now in their mid-90s. So back when the study began, as I say, about 80 years ago, the original researchers recruited 724 men into this study. And roughly half of them were sophomore students in Harvard University. So you can imagine at that time, probably reasonably well-to-do, probably from, quite a comfortable or, privileged background. And the other half of the guys in the study were boys they were intentionally chosen because they came from essentially the other side of the tracks, people that were from a more disadvantaged background, people who, weren't very wealthy, weren't very highly educated, and so on. And they followed them year after year. They did several waves of the study. And the guy who runs the study now, Robert Waldinger, he's the fourth director of the study. And he's quite delightful to listen to him talk, and how he imagines the original instigators of the study, what they would think to find that the study is still ongoing. They now have recruited almost 2,000 of the children of these 724 men and some of the wives of those men into the study. And they examined everything that you can think of in relation to what could make people healthy and happy. And can anybody tell me what the one thing, and they found categorically over an 80-year study, without exception, the one thing that definitely contributes significantly to health and to happiness for those men?
Peace of mind.
Give the lady a prize. Relationships. Those who are in happy relationships. And I don't think we necessarily just mean the one-to-one intimate, relationship, but in relationships. So they had relationships in their lives. So if we think back to Emily Werner and the children in that Hawaiian study, relationships, 30% of those children did well because they had relationships. And now we go back to the current day where there are, I think, 16 of the original surviving men from that study. And all the way through the study, from when those men were 50 years old even, it was more predictable that they would be happy and well at 80 years of age than their level of cholesterol. And they did everything with them. They did physical tests, they did interviews, they interviewed their families, they spoke to their children, they did all sorts of tests, blood tests, everything. And the significant factor for people who are happy and well into their 90s and all through their 80-year study was that they had relationships that were good. And they even found that people who stayed in relationships, we'll say a difficult marriage, and they stayed in that relationship, that did negatively affect their well-being. So it was the happy and good relationships. And they found that people who invested in the relationships, and so that's my taking from it, is go out and invest in the date night. Go back, touch base with that family member you haven't seen for a long time. If you have friends that you've lost touch with, and we all do, if you have friends you've lost touch with, maybe try dropping them a card. I'm not saying that there's a magic answer, and I'm not saying that we'll suddenly be leaping about and all our relationships will be perfect. But I think a scientific evidence of a study of 700 people over 80 years, it's really worth considering, especially when you see that there are several other studies that have sort of similar findings, that really we are, we're social creatures. And yes, if you're smoking, please stop. If you're drinking too much, please stop. But if your relationships could do with a little bit of investment, could do with a little bit of work, or if you're enjoying your relationship, tell the person. Tell your sons or daughters, I love seeing you when you come over on Sundays. Tell your children, you drive me a little bit crazy, but I love you. But, enjoy the relationships. Take the time, take the step back to enjoy the relationship. And to say, this is keeping me well and keeping me happy. And it tastes much, much nicer than a Yakult. So, if I can beg your indulgence for a few more minutes, I would like, if you don't mind, and if you would like to do so, for you to pair up with somebody, or possibly, in threes, it doesn't matter, twos or threes. And I would like you to imagine that instead of 168 hours, which there are in a week, okay, so we have 168 hours in a week, and for those of us who work full-time, 40 of those, roughly speaking, are devoted to work. Or for those who work part-time, maybe 20 hours. And maybe you throw in a few hours commuting. That could be another 5 or 10 or 15. But anyway, many of our hours are taken up with working and commuting or attending to family duties. Sometimes our work is not paid work, it's work at home. And then many of our hours, so we're supposed to get 8 hours sleep a week, so that's 56 hours. So there's a lot of hours gone out of the week. But the interesting thing is that we still really kind of have 40 hours at our disposal, but we sometimes kind of forget about that. However, I want you just to imagine, for next week only, there is an extra hour in the week. 1 extra hour. But, as they say on all the best advertisements, it comes with terms and conditions. For your extra hour, you are not allowed to do anything that you already do. So you can't say, that will be lovely, I will take my hour on Monday morning and I'll have a lovely snoozy till 8 o'clock instead of 7 o'clock. You can have your hour anytime you want it, but you must do something that you don't ordinarily do. It can be something you've done before and given up, but it can't be something that you already do. And I would like you just to take a couple of minutes to share that with your neighbour, if that's okay. Just do literally 2 minutes. And if you don't want to share it with your neighbour, make it up. I didn't say that. So I hope that sparked a few ideas for you. You'll be very delighted to hear I'm not going to ask anybody, because if I ask everybody, we'll be here all night, and I don't want to pick on anybody who might not like to share. However, Leo Varadkar, Simon Coveney, Michael D. Higgins, nobody. They can do a lot of things, but the one thing they cannot do is give anyone 1 extra hour in the week. So you need to give your extra hour in the week to yourself. And by all means, it doesn't need to be an hour. It can be 2 hours or 3 hours. But if you start with an hour, I like to call it magic hour because it just has a little ring to it. I say, I'm going to take my magic hour now. I like to spend mine with my grandchildren. But, there's lots of things you could do, whether that's going for a walk, or I heard somebody say jump on the train. Yeah, do something nice. Do something nice for yourself. Think about it. We tried it here in the hospital. We had a little Wellbeing group for ladies here in the hospital. Wow Mondays they were called. And we tried the magic hour. And it was my great delight to go through the hospital for the following couple of weeks and people to just nod over and go, I had my magic hour, Tracy, thanks a million, enjoyed my magic hour. And that speaks to, Adam Smith talks about how it's intrinsic in us to like to do something good for other people. It's in our DNA to do that, even though there's no reward in it for ourselves. So this is an idea I think worth spreading. Talk to people, say, this is my magic hour. Would you think about doing a magic hour for yourself? An hour, it is just an hour. So maybe, ditch a bit of screen time. Or, drop that really essential TV program, and do something different for your hour. Anyway, worth thinking about. There are lots of supports, and I haven't put up, there's a myriad of supports in relation to physical health, in relation to mental health, and my thinking is ask, if you're proficient with computers, look online. If not, look in the library. If not, ask your GP. There are loads and loads of ways and means of getting help and making connections with people. You may make connections with a particular, for example, Diabetes Ireland. This could be something that you're a bit worried about, or you're worried about somebody in your family. You can have a chat to them. A lot of these organisations run helplines. They provide leaflets. Mental Health Ireland, I find, are very helpful. There's lovely leaflets available here in the hospital as well, all around, different issues, for example, anxiety, things that people, sometimes carry with them and suffer with, not needlessly, but suffer alone needlessly. There are supports there. There are people who would like to help you, and it is just a matter of identifying the person and identifying the resource that you need. 12 tips to being healthy. Will we whistle through these? Eat a healthy diet. Yes, absolutely. Tracy needs to start with that. Be physically active every day your way. That's not about having to run or having to cycle or having to join the gym. It's about doing something physical that suits you. Get vaccinated, and please pass the message on about the importance of vaccination. There are all sorts of debates around vaccination, but at the end of the day, vaccination is safe and vaccination is important. Don't use any form of tobacco. No smoking, please. Avoid or minimise the use of alcohol, and certainly that is very important. It's very important if we hear figures, that 15% of people are feeling regret about something that they said or did when they were drinking. That's quite a frightening statistic. Manage stress for your physical and mental health, and they're so intertwined. So it's really important to manage the stress for both, so that we keep the blood pressure at a good level, we keep the anxiety as much as possible, we keep it, to something that we can manage. Practice good hygiene. Don't speed or drink and drive. And don't text and drive, that's the other one. Wear a seatbelt when driving and a helmet when cycling. And it seems to me that when you see the cyclists about, there's a lot of people not wearing the cycling helmets, so again, it's an important one. practice safe sex. We talked about the safety of sexual health, and we talked too about that sometimes that people, when they're in a new relationship, this is not something that they're used to, and it's not a landscape they're used to dealing with. So, you know, that can be embarrassing and it can be awkward, but it's very important to have those conversations. Regularly check your health. So whether that's your, you know, regular visit to the GP, or whether attending your hospital appointments, if that's the case, you know, make sure you keep on top of those. And then breastfeeding is best for babies. But anyway, that's the end of the tips. And I'd just like to say a quick thank you. We will welcome your questions later on. And for those of you who like to do such things, after me telling people not to have so much screen time, but you could follow us on Facebook, or you can also follow us on Twitter. Thank you.